Greetings, 2%ers. So we are going to switch gears just a little bit on this episode. What we're going to do is this 2001 Chevy Tahoe just came in. It still has snow all over it. But what we're going to do is a real-time diagnosis on this, true to the philosophy that I brought out earlier in the channel. If you've been following the channel, I have a playlist called the Diagnosis and Understanding series, and my previous video to this one was a contribution to that playlist. It is a primer on complete understanding and diagnosis of a secondary air injection reaction system. And in that video, if you are not familiar with secondary air or the smog pump, whatever you call it, that video will be necessary for you to understand what I'm doing here. Because as promised in that video, this is a car that I was looking at in the field a while ago, made an appointment to bring it to my home garage. The owner has a secondary air pump diagnostic code in the computer and also a misfire problem that we're going to figure out. And what I'm going to do is pretty much, because we've got the basic understanding from the previous video, if you've watched it, or if you didn't need to and you already know this stuff, what I'm going to do is pretty much diagnose this car pretty much as I would if I wasn't filming it. So we're just going to go right to the diagnosis and not cover every stone that we could possibly turn over and all that. So let me go over real quick the symptoms of the car. The car has a P0410 secondary air system code. That is all the description given in the code. It also has a 1415 and 1416. Those are bank-specific secondary codes. In the previous video, I explained how secondary air function is detected. It should be obvious to you what the 15 and 16 would be bank-specifically and how the oxygen sensors would react. Now, the car also has, among some other codes, a P0300 random misfire. And as a matter of fact, the car runs so terrible when it's cold, when it sits overnight. And right now in Denver, it's really cold in the winter. The car actually won't start. It'll start, sputter, die, start, sputter, die. After it warms up, it gets much better, but still has some misfires. Is that related to the secondary air code? Well, we don't know yet, but we're going to find out. So obviously what I want to do is hook this up to the computer first, and we're going to get the codes. But before I do that, I want to show you something pretty cool. Check this out. So as is often the case, I get cars that other people have looked at before me. Very often it's the owners who have replaced plugs and wires, but also a lot of times from professional diagnostic shops, sometimes even dealers, and either they couldn't figure out the problem or the customer got frustrated at going there 3-4 times and having to pay for parts over and over again and never getting it fixed. Or sometimes they get a diagnosis, but then the quote is too high and they're looking for an independent person that maybe could do the work for cheaper, in which case I always still do the diagnosis. And this is exactly such a case with this truck. I'm going to show you the bill from the automotive repair shop that the customer was at before they got the car to me, and I want to show you a little something here. So I won't mention the name of the shop, but what we've got here is the technician's report here, and he's finding all of these fault codes, which we'll take a look at. Incidentally, I forgot to mention the car does have some catalytic converter codes. Those are from actually years ago. It is already established the car does need catalytic converters. That's been known actually for years, but the owner never did it because of expense. But we've got the symptoms here. It shows that they were unable to duplicate the stalling problem, probably because the car was not cold. They did all kinds of fuel trim testing and fuel pressure testing and could not find the problem with the misfire. The only thing that they did find was a defective, notice the misspelling of defective, a defective air pump. If your career is based solely on replacing defective parts, I think you should be able to properly spell defective, but that's just me. The comment from the technician, which maybe is off screen here, says that this is the only thing wrong and replacing that air pump will fix the, not only of course the check engine light, but also the misfire problems. This was the diagnosis. Now, why am I showing you this? Here's why. So on this car, the air pump happens to be very conveniently located right here. Just going to take off the connector here. I already did this in the field, right in front of the customer, as a matter of fact. And this will be our connector here for the actual air pump. And I'm going to put 12 volts to that. All right, and I am going to put 12 volts, let's see, right directly to the air pump. And hopefully you can hear that. So there you have it, definitive proof of a professional mechanic misdiagnosis. The air pump is not defective. I don't know what's wrong with the air system, but the one thing we know 100% for sure, it does not need to have the air pump replaced, especially at a quote of $700, which thankfully the customer turned down to bring the car to me to replace the air pump, by the way. But as we see, that is not what is wrong with the car. So there you go. All the more reason why you want to be able to learn to do this stuff yourself and, more importantly, understand the stuff. By the way, just out of curiosity, I wonder what would have happened if that technician replaced the air pump and found it didn't fix the problem. Do you think they would have owned up to it? I don't know. There's a guy here in Denver, he advertises in Craigslist. Maybe he's one of my competitors. I think not. But what he does, he doesn't do any diagnosis. What his shtick is he tells you you can get a diagnosis at the dealer, but rather than pay the dealer rates to replace the parts, bring the car to him, he'll replace the parts at half the price of the dealer's quote. And the problem is, what would he do in this situation when he replaces the air pump and it doesn't fix it? You've got to learn how to diagnose things if you're going to be doing this. So now that we know that the air pump is not the problem, let's go ahead and get the scan tool on here and see if we can figure out where the problem really is. All right, and while I set up my scan tool, I do want to point out I am not bad-mouthing professional mechanics, okay? I know I've got a lot of professional mechanics on my channel here, and you guys know I really appreciate your input and especially the perspective from a professional. I know most every person worth their salt that subs to my channel would not make such a horrible misdiagnosis. My issue is with professional mechanics that would miss such an easy, obvious diagnosis and charge a customer $700 for a part they obviously don't need. That's what my issue is. But I will get past that. Right now, the truck is my responsibility, and we're going to go ahead and do this right now. Okay, so as we can see, we've got kind of a plethora of codes here. We also have the 0300 with a freeze frame that was caught, so that can be very helpful. As a matter of fact, it is going to be extremely helpful here. We'll come back to that in a minute. But what we've got here, we got an 0410 secondary air injection system. We also have a 1415 and a 1416 for each bank. Notice it doesn't give you anything more than there is a problem with the secondary air system. I explained that in the previous video, how the PCM checks for air function. So it is not surprising that we don't get any clue on any particular component. We also have, of course, the CAT codes on there somewhere. We've got, of course, 0171 and 0174 lean codes, certainly causing the misfire. We've got an 0300 misfire there too, so obviously lean misfire. If we look up here at the freeze frame, so here I've zoomed into the freeze frame, and I am looking at an absolute massive clue that pretty much actually tells me what is causing the misfire, and it actually cannot be anything with the air system. So I'll give you a second to look at that and see if you can find the massive clue. A hint, obviously the fuel trim's maxed out, the lean misfire is causing the misfire, but there is another clue on here that tells you what is causing that problem. And that clue is actually shown twice. The one that I caught my eye right off the bat is right here, 66 degree coolant temperature. Open loop is also shown here to kind of duplicate that, but this is huge. This right here tells us a couple things. First of all, I know what's causing that misfire. I have actually mentioned it in several videos before. With this being the GM plastic intake manifold, when you have a situation, at least in my experience, where you have horrible misfire and lean problems and you can't even get the car started, much less running, until it totally warms up and then it greatly improves, almost always, that is an intake manifold leak. So again, we're not going to go through all the fuel pressure testing and the spark testing and everything I do in another video. This time I'm going to use my experience as well as my intellect and scientific approach, and we're going to go right for an intake leak on this. Now, there is a second thing. Could the leak be because of something with the secondary air system? That seems totally reasonable. The answer is no. It is very unlikely that that is going to be the case because the secondary air system would be running anyway during this time. So the idea that either there is some vacuum leak in conjunction with the secondary air, or the secondary air is running all the time, not going to be likely, since our misfire condition was occurring during a time when the secondary air was been on. I cannot eliminate it totally, of course, but it is very likely, and I do believe we are going to have some type of issue with the secondary air system, and we are also going to have an intake manifold leak causing the misfire. I do not believe, like that technician did, that the misfire is caused by the secondary air system, because the secondary air system would have been operational during this period anyway. One of the things that I do know is to get an 0410 or either bank-specific secondary air code, you cannot have an 0300. So I actually do believe, because this problem has been going on for months, I do believe that the secondary air injection code predated the 0300, because otherwise it would not have popped. And I do believe we still have a secondary air problem. So we'll see if I'm right about that. Let's go ahead and attack the secondary air system first, since that will be easier. So since I'm doing a real-time diagnosis, I am going to kind of cheat a little bit. If you are watching this video because you're trying to diagnose your own air system, again, I would refer you to the previous video where I go in excruciating detail of testing every single component without a scan tool and everything. But for a real system diagnosis, what I'm going to do is actually use my scan tool to have the PCM turn the air pump on, and it'll help me to just do an elimination of various things. So let's turn on the air pump. Relay clicked, you hear the air pump. This tells me that my wiring integrity to the relay and to the air pump are good. Anything else is suspect as far as the solenoid is not necessarily tested here. Let's see if I can do no, there's no air pump solenoid, although that is connected with the relay, and obviously I can't hear the solenoid click necessarily. We have to test also the vacuum lines. The diverter valve is not tested through this method, so we still have some manual testing to do, so I'm going to go ahead and do that next. But what I'm not worried about very much is electrical or a PCM problem at this point. So obviously our easiest place to test on this model is going to be to see if the control valve works. So let me go ahead and we'll unplug this vacuum port, which will of course test at the solenoid if this all works. And let me go ahead and blow in here. And of course I cannot blow into it, so that is a good sign. And then let me get a vacuum pump here. All right, we'll put vacuum onto there, and let's see if we get some vacuum. And we do, and I kind of hear it open. So that does not, of course, necessitate that it is opening up our secondary air to the checks. So let's, okay, so I can blow through it now. So obviously we're getting secondary air to the manifold through the diverter valve. So diverter valve is ruled out, as are, by the way, the check valves. It's possible I'm only blowing through one check valve, but were that the case, we would have not got both bank-specific codes on the air, so I'm not even worried about that. So let's go ahead, and I think the next best thing to check, of course, will be the solenoid. Okay, I've removed the solenoid, but left the connections on here and also got the diverter valve out of the way so it's easier to see. Now, one thing I don't know if I mentioned, but in the field, I did an electrical test on the solenoid, and it did click. But how many times have I said just because a solenoid or relay clicks, it does not mean that you are getting the desired result. So I know that it clicks. What I don't know is A, are we getting control to it? And B, is the solenoid good? So what I'm going to do is get this hose, which of course would go to the diverter valve. And right now the solenoid should be closed. Now this solenoid is, actually I'll just do it here. This solenoid is a little bit tricky. These solenoids, I happen to know, have bleed valves on them, so we should get some resistance on the closed valve, but it won't necessarily hold the vacuum, but we should develop some vacuum. So on that side, there is no vacuum, but on the other side, this one here, we should have some resistance. Okay, and on the other side we have no resistance at all either, so this is going to be a bad solenoid. Let's go ahead and see if we can get this thing to the bench and see if maybe we can fix it. All right, so the one thing I want to do is I want to see, is there just air constantly going through the ports on the solenoid? In other words, at all times there would be vacuum applied to the diverter valve, in which case we would have basically kind of an exhaust leak. It wouldn't be anything that would cause an P0300, that's for sure, especially during open loop, because we would of course have the air pump blowing through that open air system anyway. But of course, you know, you might have some a little bit lean condition issues during closed loop when the air pump is not blowing, but you did have the system open to the air pump, and possibly some air could maybe get into the exhaust, but it's nothing I'm worried about. So is that the problem, or is this thing just bleeding out to atmosphere and there actually is never vacuum going through the solenoid, in which case it would be the opposite. We would never have air blowing through the manifolds when it is supposed to, because the diverter valve, of course, would not be opening due to the faulty solenoid. So let me go ahead and hook this up on here. And actually, I want to get some electrical connection on there too. All right, so I want to just see. Yeah, you can hear the solenoid click maybe. We'll see if you can hear that. Okay, so the solenoid does click, but we're not apparently getting our desired result. So I'm going to keep 12 volts onto the solenoid, and we'll see if we can... Well, actually, first of all, we're not going anywhere until I get some resistance in that vacuum. So actually, let's see if we can... Okay, so we actually got somewhere now. So as you can see, I'm getting some resistance in the vacuum there. I'm not saying this is a fix, by the way. I'm not recommending this as a fix at all. What I am going to do is recommend that the customer gets a new solenoid, but if they want to go ahead and just go with this, if you want to call it a fix, then that's up to them, and I won't charge them for it. But I'm going to strongly recommend they get a new solenoid. But now, let's see. All right, so we'll get 12 volts going to the solenoid. And what we should do now is when I put 12 volts to the solenoid, we should get an immediate drop in vacuum, and we do. Okay, so that is a lot better right now, but I'm, still not totally satisfied. So what we'll do is contact the customer, let them know they need a new solenoid. But before we do that, I want to see if there's anything else that might be wrong with that air system, so I don't give them a bad quote. So let's go back to the car. All right, and there really isn't much left to test on this system except to make sure that we don't have any leaks through the vacuum hose here. So let's see if I have to take this cover off, or can I reach? Yeah, I think I can just reach the vacuum hose from the intake manifold for the vacuum source. And this end of the hose and this end of the hose are the same hose. So let me put my vacuum pump on here, plug this end, and it should of course hold vacuum, meaning there's no leaks in the hose system, and there is not. You can see it holds vacuum. So that is okay. And then the only other one, where was that hose to the diverter valve? There it is. Okay, so of course the hose to the diverter valve here, and I'm just going to suck on it and it's fine. So we have no leaks in the hose system. The only thing that is clearly wrong with this system is that solenoid, so I'm going to call a solenoid on that, and we'll see what the owner wants to do. Okay, so normally what I would do, of course, is go on with the P0300 diagnosis, but I don't want to jump back and forth between the diagnoses on here, so I'm going to go just because of filming. The owner did ask that I get a new solenoid, so there is a new solenoid. There's the bad solenoid. Let's go ahead and see if there's a difference there now. Okay, so the bad solenoid now is kind of working, I think, but let's see what happens here. So we apply vacuum, and you see we get very minimal hold on the vacuum. And again, it does, these do have a bleed valve, but let's put this onto the new solenoid and watch the difference here, I bet. Yeah, look at that. See how it holds much steadier. Clearly, I'm not even sure that this would have been a fix, but we're going to go with our new solenoid here. And what was obviously happening was we were never getting activation of air. Now that I've fixed this, I guess I could have used the scan tool to prove that by turning the air system on with the engine in closed loop and showing that there was not going to be a response because, of course, the diverter valve would never open. I kind of messed up. Sorry, I didn't do that. But of course, we're going to do that as a validation for the fix with the new solenoid after I fix the car. So there you have it in just a few minutes in real time, other than the filming. A correct diagnosis. It is not a defective motor. It was a defective solenoid. But this is not going to have anything to do, I believe, with that P0300. So let's go and connect up to the scan tool and diagnose a P0300 after I install this valve. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is one final test before I go ahead and test our air system. I just want to make sure we are getting signal to the solenoid that we just replaced. That was the one thing we did not check. So I'm just going to test for voltage right now. There shouldn't be any. I got the key on, but of course engine not running, no voltage. I could start the car and do this, but an easier way, I'm just going to go ahead and have my scan tool command the air on. And let's see, we should be getting our voltage now. Okay, and there's our voltage to the solenoid. So we know that we're okay there. So let me go ahead and turn that off. And this air system should work fine. We're going to verify it with the scan tool. And then, of course, simultaneously go on to move to address the 0300, which is not going to be related to this air condition, I am sure. Okay, I just wanted to set up some misfire counters, but actually I think I took too long. I should have just stuck with one thing at a time. But yeah, we are in closed loop, so we may miss our misfire chance. I may have to let the engine cool down a little while longer, and we'll try again on that. But what we want to do now is, of course, I want to go ahead and test our air system. So if I turn on the air, of course, if everything's working, we should now see the system go lean. So let me go ahead and do that. I'm going to turn on our air pump, and we should see a immediate lean response from the O2s, and we do. So obviously the secondary air is working. And let's go ahead and turn that off, and it should go rich for a second to adjust. And you know what I'm going to do? Let's do this. Okay, just to validate this, let me go ahead and put this bad solenoid right back in, and we'll see what happens with the bad solenoid and verify that we have a fix. Okay, so I've got the bad solenoid in now, and my guess is that we're probably going to see the same thing, because I'm not sure if it's still fixed or not. But let's go ahead and turn with the bad solenoid. Okay, so I've got the microphone by the air. Hopefully you can hear it. Oh, and check it out. It goes rich. It goes rich. That was clearly the cause of the codes then. I should have done this, obviously, before I did any repairs, just to verify it. Let's go ahead and turn it off. I'll bet it goes lean to adjust now. Actually, it just goes right back to normal. So why would it go rich like that? The reason, obviously, is because we were not getting air into the manifolds. So either it is a load thing for the air pump motor, and of course we don't have the air leaning it out, or it's an anticipation thing, maybe because it knows that the air pump is going to be activated. It's calling for a rich condition to compensate for the air that would have been coming in but did not. But either case, that is pretty convincing. Let me go ahead and put that good solenoid back on. Okay, there we go, and I got the good solenoid back on just while the engine was running. So let's go ahead and turn our air on one more time, and it should go lean again, and it does go lean. So clearly that solenoid was bad. This is a fix, but let's go ahead and investigate that 0300 now.